Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the Pixelcast. I am Jeremy Alessi, the founder of PixelFest, and today, or this evening I should say, it looks like we're going to be talking a little bit about Super Mario Maker, right? Well, that's not exactly true. What I want to do is use Super Mario Maker as an example. I think about 2 years ago, I came up with this saying or philosophy, or just observation, if you will, that games simultaneously contain grand design, determinism, and free will. And I found this to be very interesting because in life, I think a lot of people are, studying reality at all times, and scientists are always, poking and prodding at reality, trying to figure out, well, what exactly is reality? What are we? It's a whole process of self-discovery. And then, of course, we have, our spiritual leaders who are, attempting to, bring us education as to what God's will may be and, what the grand design of life is. But I have found that video games, and the strangest thing, I was playing Double Dragon 4, which was a new Double Dragon that was released on PlayStation 4, I think about 2 years ago, using the Double Dragon 2 engine. Double Dragon 2 is my favorite Double Dragon. I had a ton of fun playing that with my friends back when I was 10, 11 years old, something like that. I remember it was one of the first games where I went out on a Friday night after seeing the ads in comic books. I actually have one of the comic books sitting here with an ad in it. I was using it as an example for some ad placement that we're going to do in the Swapfire comic, which is upcoming, but that's a whole other story. At any rate, I was playing this Double Dragon 4 on PlayStation and playing with some friends, and it's interesting because the designers of the game clearly intend for you to experience this game. They intend for you to start at level 1 and you struggle your way all the way through to the end, and to overcome it. But in your way, of course, there are all manner of obstacles and challenges and things that, quite frankly, are kind of a pain to get through. So there's this struggle to get through it. But that just because there's a struggle doesn't mean that the designer of the game did not intend for you to experience, all of that and experience the sort of joy that comes with overcoming it. And also inside of that is each player's free will, how they interpret it and or even if they interpret it one way, how they can then manipulate their character based on their observations or based on friends' observations. So it's very interesting. We were playing this game with 2 or 3 players. I think I had 2 buddies over playing the game, Evan and Brian, and we were sort of going through it, and it was interesting how each of us had our own take on it, and then how we would learn from each other, and then how sometimes we would just do our best to try to play the game to get through it, and then sometimes we'd somebody would just do something for fun, just for the heck of it, even though it wasn't going to benefit us in the game. And those are all sort of trademarks of free will, right? Like, you can choose to do what you want to do at any given time. You don't have to make the most efficient maneuver. And that almost goes back to what we were talking about with Untitled Goose Game a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about how, and with Apples to Apples, how people don't necessarily play games, for the sort of deterministic aspects, right? They're like the rules, and these are the best moves to make for those rules. But people don't do that. They don't do that in life. They certainly don't do that in games. And so I've wanted to get a little bit more philosophical. I've had these, I have a lot of kind of crazy philosophies. I'll just say that. If you've been to a PixelFest event, you've seen the t-shirt table. You might have seen a book up there called Life is a Vector, which is a philosophy that I like to talk about, at least. I don't know how accurate it is or anything like that, but it certainly seems to be something to it, and I'll probably save that for another episode. But this sort of trinity in game development of there being a grand design to the game, there being a set of rules or things that cause determinism in the game, right? Like if you're playing a Mario game and you hit the A button and you're on the ground, he jumps, and that's determinism, right? It's something that happens every single time, and it's predictable. And then, of course, the free will, how you as a player, how you interact with the game. And like I said, I think it's an interesting thing. I think it's an interesting thing to think about from a game design perspective, and certainly the next time you're playing a game, it's an interesting thing to think about, right? Like, I'm sure all the time you have to think when you're playing a game. I know when I was a kid, I had a hard time thinking about what the designer intended. As a kid, I would play the game and I would, I would get confused in a lot of games. I think, doing the things that I thought were logical, and I guess I was trying to put myself in the designer's shoes. I've even had this recently with the new Zelda game that we spoke about a month ago. How I'm playing this game, and some of the puzzles that I've solved in the game, like what was the designer thinking with this puzzle? Like, this is the last thing that I would think about as far as what I would think would be logical for solving some of these puzzles. And as a kid, I think it was much more of a problem, though. As you get older, you start to be able to put yourself in the designer's shoes, I think, a little bit. Especially if you've designed games, then it becomes even easier to put yourself in the designer's shoes. Although it's still not easy, as evidenced by Super Mario Maker. If you've ever played the game, you will know that people put these crazy levels together and then expect you to solve them, and you can see how professional designers actually design much easier content for people than people with Super Mario Maker levels, which I don't know if that's something that's changed. I played a lot of the Super Mario Maker on the Wii U, and although I got Super Mario Maker 2 on the Nintendo Switch, I really appreciated the 2-player features of it. I did not play as many online levels with that one, so I don't know if this is something where people have sort of settled down on creating crazy hard experiences, and in some cases people are trying to create those crazy hard experiences on purpose, and in some cases they thought they were making something that was pretty easy, and as it turned out, once they gave it to somebody else and you had that sort of veil of masked information, right? The new player didn't know the design. All of a sudden people realize, wow, it's actually difficult to design something that is like just right. It's just difficult enough to be fun. And that's all part of the grand design aspect of this, right? And another thing that I guess troubles me in the modern world, I read a lot of science and tech news, obviously, and I do want to go over a little bit of news today, but just related to the gaming industry. As it comes to science and technology news, though, a lot of what we see studying neuroscience, obviously people studying physics, the suggestion is that from that world, from that perspective, that everything is just determinism, right? And that there is no free will, there is no grand design. It's all just a bunch of things bouncing off of each other, causing complex reactions. But nowhere in that recipe, at least from the scientific perspective, is there room for free will or grand design. And when I see that, I go, it just doesn't feel right to suggest that. And so I look to games as something games are tangible. I know how they're made. They're something that I can look to, pick apart. I can come in as a player using my own free will. I can come in as a designer where I know that the game follows my grand design. And obviously when I'm playing a game, the designer is not there, and what I feel are just the remains of that designer's intent, which is carried out through a set of rules, which is the deterministic part of the game. And the opening video there is interesting because that's an auto level. One of the really popular things in Super Mario Maker are these levels that people put together where you don't press any buttons and the level just carries Mario throughout the entire level. Now, imagine if you couldn't determine that level came from a human being and was uploaded to a network or whatever. Or, imagine that you just had the hardware of the Nintendo system that was there, and you could sort of audit the hardware. You could see, the electrons, coming down the wires and so on and so forth. And you had to try to determine what was going on, inside of that. Or, just imagine that your only frame of reference is the game itself. If you watch that, you would see very little intent from the grand design perspective, right? You would maybe at first you would say, oh, there's intent, but then all of a sudden you run the level over and over again and you just see, wow, well, these blocks do this and these skull things do that and these do that. And you can measure all that stuff and, perform this mass auditing process, but it really wouldn't tell you much about the intent or about the, the designer of that level. And, I think that's something to be considered about our modern day scientific, view of reality, where, essentially grand design's been taken out and, free will has been taken out and it's just all determinism, right? Because like I said, I think games clearly show that there is room for one medium where grand design, I don't know, I'm having a hard time with this word today, determinism and free will, all sort of coexist and overlap in one space. I think that's very interesting. It's one possibility space. A game, I consider a game essentially a possibility space, right? You take all of these entities and you put them together with a set of rules, and there's so much you can do in this possibility space. Something like Super Mario Maker 2 is actually quite a large possibility space. Something like Minecraft is also a very large possibility space. And with these creative games, and obviously people share all sorts of different interpretations on that possibility space through YouTube, but each of these possibility spaces had a designer, whether it be a Shigeru Miyamoto or Notch. There was a grand design overarching vision. Each of them has rules and regulations that cause determinism to be carried out within the game, and then each of them has players that are going in and carrying out their free will. So I've been sort of fascinated about that, and I said this, I put it in a Facebook post honestly a few years ago when I was sort of had this moment where I thought about it. Put it up there, and a lot of people liked it. People that are non-game players, as I think as well as game players, sort of appreciated this notion that we have this great medium today that shows us clearly that these things can all coexist in one space. Just something to think about, I think, philosophically about games. I think there's just so much that we can learn, about games. And it's something else that I like to use Super Mario Brothers as an example as well, considering the auditing and all that. But it's, a very simple thing, right? You go into Super Mario Brothers and play it as much as you want, measure as much as you want inside the game, right? If that was your only frame of reference, again, and you're not going to find Shigeru Miyamoto inside the game, right? And I think that speaks to the fact that in this great vast universe that we have, this is a creation, and there could very easily be a creator that would escape all of our capabilities to audit and try to measure and everything that we see through our scientific lens. And this isn't I'm not ranting or against science. Science is fine. I think it's part of the game. But you're reading these headlines and you're reading this stuff, and there's just so many headlines coming out there that they're taking the space that we exist in reality, and they're just saying, free will, grand design, just determinism, that's it. That's all there is to it. And of course, you couldn't do that with a game, right? So just something to think about. So I think with that, and this is probably a topic that I will jump into more later. I think this could be something that would be like a good discussion, because my view on it is just so, I think it's almost kind of narrow, because I had the realization about it and I just thought, wow, it's kind of mind-blowing to think about, right? And but my perspective on it is very clear. I had almost like just a flash of light went off. I was playing this game this one day. It's strange that it was Double Dragon, and I just thought about it, and I thought how to put it succinctly. And I put this Facebook together, this Facebook post out there. Some people liked it, and I was like, cool. It makes total sense. Games are this space where grand design, determinism, and free will all coexist peacefully. And it's very cool. So we'd love to get into a little bit more later, maybe get a discussion on that going later, but just some food for thought for today. And with that, let's take a look at some news. So all the headlines today come from Gamasutra, and I haven't covered the news in a few weeks, but again, gamasutra.com. It's kind of a play on the Karma Sutra, but essentially this is game industry news. I used to write for Gama Sutra, and I have been reading this website for 2 decades or something. I check it every day. It just sort of keeps me up to speed with what's going on in the game industry. And so, I recommend that you check it out. If, of course, you just want to check out the Pixelcast and have me relay whatever the news is to you, that's great too. So the first headline is Epic Games acquires photogrammetry asset library and toolset maker Quixel. So photogrammetry is something that I think sort of like jumped up on the stage in 2015 when the new Battlefront game was released on PlayStation and Xbox, the Star Wars game. And they used photogrammetry to get, the Millennium Falcon in there, all the ships, a lot of the levels, and it had this very cool look. It really does look like photographic 3D, and that's photogrammetry, where you're actually doing sort of like a 3D scanning and also like doing the texture work at the same time. And so Quixel, I'd read about Quixel, in the past, but it looks like Epic Games wants to do more with photogrammetry, and so they've acquired this tool maker and to bring it in house. And so that's gonna be interesting. I'd like to see how this affects Epic's games and the Unreal Engine, because quite frankly, I feel like you can almost always identify an Unreal Engine game. They have a very similar look. Usually, unless somebody does a lot of work to change it. And it's an interesting acquisition. We've been seeing a lot of acquisitions lately. One of the more interesting ones, and I don't have the headline here, was that Unity acquired a streaming tool maker, Obvious, a couple of weeks ago. And so that's something that jumped up on my radar as I'm continuing to work on Stream SDK, something I mentioned a few weeks ago with the things that I'm working on. So, we're seeing Unreal and Unity, these, Epic, sort of scaling up, and they're actually making a lot of acquisitions lately, so it's interesting. Okay, some more Epic news, but it's not. I don't know if you consider this good news or positive news, but it looks like Epic's been going around suing testers that are leaking, content from their game. So in this case, Epic is suing another tester for leaking Fortnite Chapter 2 content, and I don't know what to make of this stuff. I mean, I suppose that it's very important for these content creators to keep what they're working on secret, and they want to set examples like, hey, let people know that they're serious about this stuff. I don't know how much effect this has on the bottom line, when leaks happen. So it's as I can say, as a player, as sort of an outsider, this isn't my business, so I'm not super, I don't feel like my business is being damaged here. And as an outsider, it's tough to see. Now, if I were Epic, or the leadership at Epic, and, I knew that I had a company with hundreds, or even, I don't know how many people they have working for them. I know Unity's got 2,000 people working for them now. But if I had a company with hundreds or thousands of people working for me, and I thought somebody might, ruin the content that's paying all the bills, and I was responsible for all those mouths to feed, then of course something like this might be more serious, might be a more serious matter. To me, it seems like they're just trying to make examples out of people, though. I think, I can kind of see both sides, but, I really, and I guess it depends on how much they leaked, but, interesting nonetheless. Nintendo, while nostalgia has appeal, remakes need to offer new game experiences. And, the funny thing about Nintendo is, obviously, this makes a ton of sense, and I think this is something that Nintendo has had to repeat over the years. I think we've seen them, say this, and I think that they do this. In general, Nintendo comes with the same characters and, sometimes even very similar either camera or, camera perspectives or controls, and the games are still different. Somehow they always do manage to bring new mechanics into the fold and mix it in with the familiar. My assessment of Nintendo used to be that that's exactly what they did, was give you new gameplay mechanics to carry out with the same characters and the same locales and things that are familiar. So, hey, you like a Zelda game, but we're going to do X, Y, or Z, which is new with your Zelda game. And it's a way of bringing players into something they're familiar with while giving them new experiences at the same time. And it seems like the new president is just reiterating this. Google plans to roll out Stadia features weekly after a bare-bones November 19th launch. This makes a lot of sense. In other news, I think it was yesterday, Disney Plus launched, and a lot of the headlines, at least on the tech-based sites, were that there were crashes and hiccups and hangups, so on and so forth. I think it makes a ton of sense for Google to launch with something bare bones that they feel confident will run flawlessly and then roll out new features over time. That just seems to be a logical strategy when rolling out a new, big platform thing like this. So, let us know on PixelFest Facebook, or email us, community@pixelfest.org. If you're interested in Google Stadia. I am interested in it from a business perspective. The fact that I'm working on Stream SDK, I have an interest in all things streaming, real-time streaming especially, and I don't know if I will be playing anything on Stadia, but I will certainly be very, very interested to see what's going on in the news with it and hearing about anybody local that's experimenting with this. USVA evaluating how more accessible games help veterans heal. So I thought this was an interesting headline. Obviously, here in Hampton Roads, we have a lot of veterans, one of the big retirement hotspots in the country for folks that have served. And I've been thinking about how games are going to help in old folks' homes and things like that. We have seen how cancer patients, and there's research, and I actually was involved with a potential project, at least with CHKD, on doing something like this, using VR to reduce the amount of medication or pain medication that cancer patients need, and other people have done that. And so I think it's an interesting headline because it's something that I think is very near and dear to our area in general. And this is a good use of gaming technology to help veterans heal. So it's just something to check out a little bit deeper if you head over to gamasutra.com. And Galaga and pole position composer Nobuyuki Onogi has passed away. So at the age of 63. So going back, of course, a few weeks ago, maybe even a month ago now, in the Pixelcast, we covered game developer and game developer deaths, obituaries. And obviously here, Nobuyuki is, he passed away. He's much older than I think the average age of a game developer. But nevertheless, seeing this as sad news, and I can't help but feel that it's too soon at 63 years old. But of course, we're thankful for Mr. Onogi's contributions to the game industry, and it's just always sad to see this. And I want to celebrate, anybody who's, I think, contributed to the games industry. So I'm probably going to be bringing these up more. And also I think this is something, as I stated in the past, that I want to do a little bit more research on, and just keep an eye on this. Keep a finger on the pulse of this thing. Because if you're thinking about developing games, or if you are developing games, it's something to consider. And let's see. And that's it for the news today. Now we are at 24 minutes, and I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past couple weeks. Last week when I covered Woz and sort of looked into his background, I actually found out some more about him, and in fact on the Apple II, the BASIC language that he created in all the original documentation was actually called Game Basic. I thought that was very interesting. So the Apple II was intended for even the language used to create games. And there's a really good interview, a Game Informer interview, like in a hotel, maybe like an hour-long interview, where Woz espouses his love for games. Apparently he was very good at Tetris, and had the high score for years and years and years that he would send to Nintendo Power. Eventually they stopped posting his high scores, so he had one issue where he had spelled his name backwards and put that up there to get his high score back into the magazine, which is just kind of funny and sort of typical Woz, liking to I think play pranks on people. And that was interesting. Last week's episode I think was very interesting, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I am at a point currently with the PixelFest planning where we are just really waiting on some news from the city of Norfolk. And as soon as this is cleared, I think progress is going to move very quickly on the event. As I have stated in previous episodes, we've got our anchor partners all set up. We know where the event, or we know where we want the event to be. And we do need a little bit of buy-in from the city of Norfolk in order to sort of make that happen. And it seems like we have that buy-in, but it's not all confirmed yet. The date that we have planned is not completely confirmed with the city, and so really just waiting on that. And I'm so sorry. I'm like looking forward to this news, trying to lock this down, and I can't wait to announce more. But we got back to the news this week. It was a little bit of a slow week. I think I've been doing a lot of contemplating lately, and and I think that's why I wanted to sort of get a little philosophical. And if you have any thoughts on the notion of grand design, determinism, and free will occupying the same space, I think it'd be very interesting. I think it'd be a more interesting thing almost for discussion than for me to just sort of put the idea out there and just sort of espouse it or talk about it. I mean, truth be told, I've only put this idea forth once or twice in discussions, not a whole lot. So it's not something that I think has really been debated, and that's something I like. Debate, I love it when people get together and have different ideas and can cross-pollinate in a productive manner. It's something that seems to be missing on the internet these days, but I for one am still very open to other people's ideas. For the most part, when I put some idea forth, I'm just saying, hey, I've thought of this, and I'm never necessarily trying to change somebody else's mind. Usually what I'm doing is trying to test my own ideas and just use other people and their the fact that they face life in a new and different direction than I do is what allows them to bring new ideas into my view that otherwise wouldn't be there. So this could be an interesting topic. So I am going to go ahead and get going this evening though. Again, I am Jeremy Alessi, founder of PixelFest, and I want everyone to, of course, continue growing through love of games. And have a good evening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.